My name is Shay. If you're watching this, it's because you've probably felt it too. That quiet, sinking feeling when your hard work, your passion, your very identity is erased and claimed by someone else. You pour your soul into something, and they hand you back an empty cup. If that feeling is familiar, then maybe my story will help you know you're not alone. Hit that like button and subscribe, because it really helps to know I'm not just screaming into the void. This is the story of how I took back my name from the man who tried to bury it. It started with a photograph, not a happy one. It was a heavy, black frame, the kind people use for expensive degrees or corporate awards. Inside, under glare-proof glass, was a concept art print of the Helios Tower. My tower. Every line, every curve, every pane of shimmering, energy-generating glass was a ghost of 1,000 late nights I had spent at my drafting table. Taped to the back was a small, cream-colored envelope. Inside, a note, written in Mason's arrogant, slanted handwriting. 5 words: a souvenir for your contributions. A souvenir, like a cheap snow globe you buy at an airport gift shop. My bonus for pouring 3 years of my life, my heart, and my mind into designing the most revolutionary green skyscraper this city had ever seen. He had presented my work, every last detail, as his own. He had won the city's most prestigious architectural contract, a legacy-defining project. And in the official press release, the one splashed across every major news outlet, I was relegated to a footnote. Shay, a junior project lead who assisted on the project. Assisted. The word felt like a shard of glass under my tongue. But Mason, in his rush to claim the spotlight, overlooked one very small, very critical detail. He owned the steel, the glass, and the concrete. But I owned the building's soul. The building's dynamic energy grid, the very thing that made it green, ran on proprietary software. Software I had written, software I held the patent for. The day before the grand opening, with news crews setting up their cameras and the mayor preparing his speech, I sat in the quiet of my new empty office, opened my laptop, and triggered a system-wide efficiency flaw. A flaw only I could fix. Now, the only way for Mason to get the city's final green light was to license the solution from my new firm, and the price of that license was going to cost him everything. It wasn't about the money. People always think it's about the money, but you can't put a price on erasure. You can't invoice for stolen identity. This was about correction. This was about gravity. What goes up must come down. And Mason had been flying on my wings for far too long. The fallout began not with a bang, but with a quiet, hollow echo in my apartment. The framed photo sat on my kitchen counter, leaning against the backsplash, its presence a constant, silent accusation. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, and I couldn't bring myself to hang it. It was a monument to my own foolishness. The city was celebrating. Mason was on every news channel, his silver hair and tailored suit the very picture of architectural genius. He used words like my vision and my philosophy. My vision. I had sketched the initial design on a stained coffee shop napkin during a thunderstorm, inspired by the way light diffracted through the raindrops on the window. My philosophy. I had spent a year researching biomimicry, basing the tower's energy distribution system on the vascular structure of a leaf. He talked about the building as if he had given birth to it, while I was the midwife who was expected to be grateful for just being in the room. That first night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, the city lights painting shifting patterns on my wall. The Helios Tower was out there, a new star in the skyline, and it felt like a part of my own body had been amputated and put on public display. Every celebratory news report was a fresh wave of nausea. I saw him clinking champagne glasses with the mayor, his arm around his wife, smiling a smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. The same smile he'd given me a week earlier, when he'd told me the board decided to go in a different direction for the lead architect role on the next project. A different direction meant his nephew, a kid fresh out of design school with a portfolio full of modernist birdhouses. My mind kept replaying the last 3 years in a relentless, agonizing loop. I remembered the day I first met Mason. I was a young architect, full of fire and ideas, just hired at his prestigious firm, Sterling and Vance's. He was the legend, Mason Vance, the man whose name was on the door. He called me into his office, a cavernous space with a view that could make a god feel humble. He'd seen my graduate thesis on sustainable urban design. He said it was revolutionary. He said I had a gift. He spoke of mentorship, of legacy, of changing the world one building at a time. I believed him. I drank it all in. He became more than a boss. He was a mentor, a guide. I looked up to him with a kind of fierce filial loyalty that now feels nauseatingly naive. The Helios Tower was my baby, born from that initial conversation. Mason had secured the initial pitch meeting, but he had nothing to show. He was coasting on his reputation, his own well of ideas having run dry years ago. He gave me the prompt. The city wanted a landmark, something that screamed future, but also responsible. He gave me a budget and a deadline, and then he vanished, off to play golf with city council members and charm investors. I was left in the trenches. For 3 years, my life was a blur of caffeine, CAD software, and takeout containers. My friends stopped calling because I never answered. My apartment became a glorified storage unit for my clothes. The office was my home. I remember one specific winter. We were a year into the design, and a major flaw was discovered in the initial structural concept. It wouldn't be able to support the weight of the solar-paneled glass skin I'd designed. The engineering team said it was impossible. Mason, on a video call from a ski resort in Aspen, told me to figure it out. He didn't offer a solution. He just presented a problem and an expectation. So I figured it out. I spent 72 hours straight, fueled by nothing but coffee and the fear of failure, redesigning the entire internal load-bearing structure. I developed a new honeycomb framework, lighter and stronger than anything we'd used before. It was a breakthrough. I sent the revised blueprints to Mason at 3 in the morning. His reply came 4 hours later. 2 words. Good. Proceed. The next week, at a meeting with the primary investors, he presented my honeycomb framework as a stroke of genius he'd had while contemplating the elegant efficiency of nature. He never mentioned my name. I sat 2 chairs down from him, my hands clenched into fists under the table, a hot, quiet shame flushing up my neck. I told myself it was for the good of the project. I told myself my time would come. It was a lie I became very, very good at telling myself. It was the anesthetic that got me through the day. This pattern repeated itself a dozen times. The hydroponic vertical gardens on the residential floors, my idea. The rainwater reclamation system that would provide all the buildings' gray water, my design. The wind turbine system integrated into the spire, my calculations. Each time, I would innovate, and he would present. I was the ghostwriter for his masterpiece, and I let him do it. This is the part that's hard to admit, the part that viewers might call me a fool for. Why did I stay? Why did I let him gut my portfolio and wear my accomplishments like a stolen suit? Because I thought that's how the game was played. I thought if I just kept my head down, kept producing brilliant work, eventually, my value would be undeniable. He kept dangling the promise of a partnership. Just one more project. Shay, he'd say. Once Helios is done, we'll make it official. Your name will be right next to mine. I clung to that promise like a drowning woman clings to a piece of driftwood. It was a stupid, foolish hope, but it was all I had. I was playing a long game of chess, or so I thought. The terrible truth was that I wasn't even a player. I was just a piece on his board, and he was about to sacrifice me to protect his king. The memory that truly broke through the fog of my despair came from a place I hadn't expected. It was a memory of my father. He was an old-school electrical engineer, a man who smelled of solder and coffee. He spent his life designing circuit boards, intricate little cities of logic and power. When I was a kid, he showed me one of his early designs. It was a dense, complex work of art. He pointed to a tiny, almost invisible set of initials etched into the corner of the green board. Always sign your work, kiddo, he'd told me. Not for them, for you, so you never forget who made it. That memory, That simple piece of advice was the catalyst. It was the spark that lit the fuse. I had signed my work. Mason just hadn't bothered to look in the right place. The energy grid software, the one I'd named Aura OS, was my true signature. It was the tower's central nervous system, and it was a masterpiece of code I had built from the ground up. It wasn't just a part of the Helios project. It was something I had started developing years before I even met Mason. It began as a personal project in my tiny post-grad apartment, an obsession with creating a truly intelligent, predictive energy management system. The core algorithm was based on swarm intelligence, mimicking the way a flock of birds or a school of fish moves in perfect, decentralized harmony. I wanted to apply that to a power grid, allowing it to react and redistribute energy not just based on current demand, but on predicting future needs with terrifying accuracy. It was my secret passion, the thing I worked on when I couldn't sleep. When the Helios project came along, it was the perfect vessel for my creation. I told Mason I had a concept for a revolutionary energy management system. I was careful with my words. I never said I was building it on company time or with company resources. I used my own laptop, my own servers. He saw it as a means to an end, a technical feature that would help him win the bid. He didn't care about the how, only the what. He gave me a budget for hardware integration, for sensors, for the physical infrastructure. He never once asked about the intellectual property of the code itself. In his world, ideas were like air. They belonged to whoever was powerful enough to capture them. He assumed my brain was a company asset. That was his first mistake. Halfway through the project, when Aura OS was becoming incredibly complex, I brought on a junior coder to help with the grunt work of integration and testing. Her name was Lena. She was young, brilliant, and perpetually underestimated by the old boys club at the firm. She reminded me of myself. While Mason and the other senior partners barely acknowledged her existence, I saw the spark in her. I took her under my wing. I explained the core logic of Aura OS to her. I taught her my coding philosophy. I listened to her ideas. We'd spend long nights in the server room, the hum of the machines our only soundtrack, making the system perfect. Lena saw everything. She saw me pulling the all-nighters. She saw my name on the initial code repositories. She saw Mason walk in, ask for a 5-minute summary, and then walk out to present it as his own. She was my silent witness. Her loyalty wasn't to Sterling and Vance. It was to me. One day, about a year before the project's completion, I took a step that felt, at the time, like an act of profound paranoia. Now I see it as the single smartest thing I have ever done. I took the core code of Aura OS, the predictive algorithm that was its heart, and I filed for a patent. I used an old friend from law school, paid her with my own savings, and I did it under my own name. I created a legal firewall between my creation and Mason's firm. Here's the debatable part. The part that the well-actually crowd in the comments will love. Generally, work you create for your employer belongs to your employer. It's called work for hire. But my lawyer, bless her shark-like heart, found a loophole. I had documented with meticulous timestamps and personal server logs that the foundational algorithm was developed before my employment. I had integrated it into Helios, yes, but I had never formally signed over the underlying intellectual property. Mason just had me sign a standard employment agreement, not a specific IP transfer for this pre-existing work. His arrogance was my shield. He never thought to ask a junior architect to sign a specific IP waiver for a piece of software he didn't even understand. He just assumed he owned it all. He assumed wrong. The patent was my parachute. As the Helios project neared its end, and Mason's promises of partnership grew more and more vague, I started building the plane to attach that parachute to. Quietly, discreetly, I registered a new company, a simple LLC. I called it Phoenix Grid Solutions. I used a registered agent service to keep my name off the public documents. I opened a business bank account. I built a simple professional website. It was my lifeboat, waiting just out of sight. I hoped I would never need it. But hope is not a strategy. I told myself it was just a backup plan, a way to do some freelance consulting on the side once Helios was launched. But deep down, I think I knew. I was preparing for war. The day I got the framed photo, the souvenir, was the day I knew the war had begun. After the initial shock wore off, a strange, cold calm settled over me. The grief was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. My misplaced loyalty had been cauterized. There was no more emotion, only calculation. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a strategist, and my opponent had just revealed his entire hand, confident that I had nothing left to play. It wasn't about revenge, it was about re-establishing the truth. The truth was that Helios Tower, without Aura OS, was just another pretty building. It was a beautiful, expensive, and profoundly stupid skyscraper. It couldn't meet the city's green energy mandate without my software. The entire contract, the 9-figure bonus for the firm, the legacy Mason was so desperate to build, it all depended on a few 100,000 lines of code that he didn't own and couldn't control, and he had no idea. My first call was to Lena. I caught her just as she was leaving the office, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She'd been reassigned to Mason's nephew's birdhouse project. She was devastated. I told her what had happened. I told her about the footnote, the photo, the insult. I heard her take a sharp breath on the other end of the line. Then I told her about Phoenix Grid Solutions. I told her about the patent. There was a long silence. Then she said, her voice low and steady, "Shay, what do you need?" Her loyalty was a balm on the raw wound of Mason's betrayal. It was the first real piece of good news in a sea of bad. I told her I needed information. I needed to know the final inspection schedule, the exact protocols the city's technical team would be running. I needed to know who was on site and when. She didn't hesitate. "I still have my admin credentials for the project server," she said. "They're so arrogant they probably haven't even thought to revoke them. I'll get you everything." The next few days were a blur of quiet, focused activity. I moved into a small, sterile office space I'd leased for Phoenix Grid. It was nothing like the polished luxury of Sterling and Vance. It was just 4 white walls, a cheap desk, and a very, very fast internet connection. It was perfect. It was a war room. Lena became my field operative, my eyes and ears inside the enemy camp. She sent me encrypted files every night. Security schedules, network diagrams, lists of the city inspectors, and their specific testing criteria. She was taking a huge risk, and I knew it, but she believed in me. She believed in the work we had done together. While Mason was doing press interviews and taking victory laps, I was preparing my weapon. I didn't have to hack into the Helios Tower's system. That's the beautiful part. I had built it. I had the master key, a secure backdoor that I had coded into the deepest level of the OS. It wasn't malicious, it was a diagnostic tool, a way for the system's architect, me, to perform core-level updates and fixes without having to go through the standard user interface. It was a feature, not a bug, a feature Mason had no idea existed. From my laptop at Phoenix Grid, I could access every single line of code in Aura OS. The plan was simple. It had to be. Complexity creates variables, and I wanted none. The city's final certification depended on the building meeting a series of stringent green star efficiency metrics over a continuous 48-hour observation period. It had to maintain a specific low level of energy consumption, prove its ability to sell excess power back to the city grid, and demonstrate the seamless integration of its solar, wind, and reclamation systems. My efficiency flaw wouldn't cause a blackout. That would be too dramatic, too obvious. It was more subtle, more insidious. I would write a small, elegant script. This script would introduce a tiny rounding error in the predictive algorithm of Aura OS, a flaw of less than 0.01%. Individually, each miscalculation would be imperceptible, but across millions of calculations per second, managing thousands of sensors and power relays, the error would compound, it would cascade, and the system would start to chase its own tail. It would overallocate power to one sector, then panic and overcompensate by drawing too much from the city grid to power another. The beautiful, harmonious dance of energy I had designed would become a clumsy, stumbling mess. The tower's energy consumption wouldn't just fail to meet the Green Star standard, it would spike catastrophically. The building would appear on paper to be an environmental disaster. The best part, the hardware would all check out. The sensors, the turbines, the panels, they would all be functioning perfectly. The problem would be invisible, hidden in the ghost of the machine. It would be a problem no one but me could even diagnose, let alone fix. The day before the grand opening arrived, the air in the city was electric with anticipation. News vans were camped outside the gleaming base of the Helios Tower. The mayor was scheduled to give a pre-opening tour to a delegation of international investors at 2 p.m. The city's technical certification was the last hurdle. The 48-hour observation period was scheduled to end at noon. At 11:45 a.m., I logged into Aura OS through my secure backdoor. My heart was a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. There was no fear, no anxiety, just a profound, almost serene sense of purpose. I saw the system's dashboard, a beautiful flowing river of green and blue data streams. The tower was performing flawlessly, even better than my simulations had predicted. A part of me, the creator, felt a pang of pride. Then I remembered the framed photo, the footnote, the stolen years. The feeling vanished. I opened a command line interface. The cursor blinked, waiting. I pasted in the script I had written, the one I had named correction.shitch. It wasn't about revenge, it was about correcting the record. I looked at the clock. 11:50 a.m. 10 minutes until the end of the observation period. I took a deep breath, and I pressed enter. The command executed in less than a second. On my screen, nothing changed. The dashboard still showed a perfect, flowing river of data, but I knew that deep inside the code, a tiny seed of chaos had been planted. I closed my laptop. There was nothing more to do but wait. The first sign that the dominoes were falling came an hour later, via a text from Lena. It was a single screenshot, an internal email from the head of engineering to Mason. The subject line was in all caps. "You are gent, catastrophic failure, in Green Star certification." My lips curved into a smile I didn't have to force. It was the first genuine smile I'd had in weeks. The chaos inside Sterling and Vance was, from what Lena described, a masterpiece of corporate panic. Mason, who had been preening for a TV interview in the lobby of Helios Tower, was yanked away by a pale-faced assistant. The city inspectors, grim-faced and tight-lipped, had delivered the verdict. Not only had the tower failed certification, but its energy grid was dangerously unstable. The grand opening was on hold. The international investors were being politely uninvited from their tour. The mayor's office had called, and they were not happy. Mason, according to Lena, who was hiding in a supply closet near the main conference room, was losing his mind. He was shouting. He was throwing things. He was blaming everyone. He blamed the engineers, the hardware vendors, the city inspectors. He screamed that someone must have sabotaged the system. It was the first intelligent thing he had said all day. He just had the wrong suspect. His tech team was in full-blown meltdown. They were running diagnostics, but everything came back green. The servers were fine. The network was secure. The physical turbines and solar panels were operating perfectly. They were like doctors trying to diagnose a disease in a patient whose every vital sign was normal. They were looking for a broken bone when the problem was a psychosis. They couldn't see the flaw because they didn't understand the architecture. I had built Aura OS like a living brain, with layers of abstraction that protected the core functions. They had the user manual, the admin passwords, the things a zookeeper needs to run a zoo. But I was the geneticist who had designed the animals. They could see what the system was doing, but they had no way of understanding why. My next move had to be precise. I couldn't just call them and say, "Having trouble." I had to create a situation where they had no choice but to come to me. Phoenix Grid Solutions needed to enter the stage, not as an antagonist, but as a savior. I spent the afternoon drafting a technical analysis. It was a brilliant piece of work, if I do say so myself. In clear, concise language, it explained exactly what was happening to the Helios grid, without revealing how I knew. I described the cascading feedback loop, the algorithmic decay, the signature of a predictive model that was chasing ghosts. I hypothesized that the root cause was not a hardware failure, but a deep systemic flaw in the proprietary control software. And at the end, I offered a solution. Phoenix Grid Solutions, I wrote, was a boutique firm specializing in next-generation dynamic grid software. We had a proprietary diagnostic tool that could perhaps isolate the flaw. The analysis was anonymous, a white paper from a concerned third party. I sent it not to Mason, but to the head of the city's technical advisory committee, a woman named Dr. Eris Thorne. I knew of her by reputation. She was a no-nonsense engineer, a legend in her own right, and she had no patience for corporate politics. I was betting that she would care more about solving the problem than protecting Mason Vance's ego. I sent the email from a generic info address at Phoenix Grid. Then I waited again. The bet paid off faster than I could have imagined. Less than 2 hours later, Lena sent me another text. This one was a photo of Dr. Thorne, flanked by 2 city officials, storming into the Sterling and Vance conference room. In her hand was a printout of my analysis. According to Lena's frantic, whispered updates, Dr. Thorne laid my paper on the table and told Mason that his team had until morning to fix the problem, or the city would not only deny the certificate of occupancy indefinitely, but they would also begin legal proceedings to claw back the substantial green tech subsidies the firm had already received. She then told him that a firm called Phoenix Grid Solutions had sent her a fascinating analysis and suggested that maybe Mason should give them a call. She was essentially handing him my business card. Check. The ensuing panic was predictable. Mason's IT team spent hours trying to find out who or what Phoenix Grid Solutions was. They found my clean, professional, and completely uninformative website. No names, no staff list, just a contact form and a phone number. A phone number that now rang on the burner phone sitting on my desk. The first call came from Mason's head of IT. He was arrogant, condescending. He tried to bully me, demanding to know how we got our data, accusing us of hacking. I stayed calm. I played the part of a small, professional consultant. I said, "Ma'am, we can't reveal our methods, but our analysis is sound. We believe we can help." He demanded a meeting, a technical deep dive with his team. I politely declined. "Our diagnostic tool is proprietary," I explained. "We can run the analysis, but we can't show you how it works." He scoffed and hung up. He thought he could break my code himself. I gave him 12 hours to fail. He failed. By the next morning, the burner phone was ringing again. This time it was Mason himself. His voice was a strained, artificial calm, like a man trying to smile while being tasered. He said, "Shay, I recognized your voice." He thought he was being clever, catching me. I didn't deny it. I just said, "Hello, Mason. I've been expecting your call." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could hear the gears grinding in his head, the arrogance fighting with the sheer gut-wrenching panic. He was starting to understand. Not everything, but enough. He tried to play the old mentor card. He said, "Shay, what is this? What are you doing? This project is as much yours as it is mine. You're hurting the team. You're hurting yourself." It was a pathetic, transparent attempt at manipulation. The time for that was long over. I kept my voice even, professional. I said, "Mason, the work speaks for itself. The Helios Tower has a critical flaw in its energy operating system. My company, Phoenix Grid Solutions, is the only firm in the world capable of fixing it. We would be happy to provide you with a licensing proposal." He exploded. The calm facade shattered, and the real Mason came roaring out. He threatened me. He would sue me into oblivion. He would ruin me. He would tell the world I had sabotaged the project. He said he owned my work. He owned me. It was all noise, all bluster. The impotent rage of a king who has just realized his castle is built on quicksand. I let him rant. When he finally wound down, his breath ragged, I said one simple thing. Mason, I suggest you have your lawyers read the patent for Aura OS, number 9B7884C3, and then, I suggest they read my employment contract, specifically, the addendum on pre-existing intellectual property. Then, when you're ready to have a serious conversation, you can call this number again. And then I hung up. Checkmate. The power shift wasn't a slow-moving tide. It was a dam breaking. The moment Mason's lawyers, the ones he was paying an obscene amount per hour, read my patent and my contract, the entire dynamic inverted. The threats stopped. The bluster vanished. It was replaced by a chilling, desperate silence. He knew, with the kind of certainty that freezes the blood, that I had him. The city was breathing down his neck. The investors were threatening to pull their funding. The grand opening was cancelled, a public humiliation of epic proportions. Every hour the Helios Tower sat dark and useless. It was costing his firm millions in penalties and lost revenue. The news of the catastrophic software flaw leaked to the press. It was a feeding frenzy. Mason's carefully crafted image as the visionary architect began to crumble. He was now the guy who built the world's most expensive paperweight. The narrative was no longer about his genius. It was about his incompetence. And through it all, my new company, Phoenix Grid Solutions, was being mentioned in the articles as the mysterious white hat firm that had first identified the problem. We were an enigma, a ghost in the machine, and our mystique was growing by the hour. This is when the real exodus began. It wasn't just about the tower anymore. It was about confidence. The clients of Sterling and Vance, the big money investors and corporations who had hired Mason for his reputation of flawless execution, started to get nervous. If he could screw up his own legacy project so badly, what other skeletons were in his closets? What other projects were built on a foundation of lies and overlooked details? The first to jump ship was a major tech company that had hired Sterling and Vance to design their new European headquarters. I knew their CEO, a sharp, insightful woman named Clara. I had been the one to personally walk her through the initial designs, the one who had sat with her engineers for weeks. Mason had just shown up for the final handshake. I got an email from Clara directly. No pleasantries. It said, "Shay, I just heard about Helios. I'm not surprised. The real brains of that operation just left the building. Are you taking on new clients?" I didn't have to poach anyone. They were coming to me. They didn't trust Mason anymore. They trusted me. They trusted the work. My reputation, the one Mason had tried so hard to bury, was my most valuable asset. Within a week, 2 more major clients had put their projects with Sterling and Vance on hold and had reached out to Phoenix Grid for consulting. My little lifeboat was suddenly looking like an aircraft carrier. Meanwhile, Mason was in a free fall. He made one last, desperate counter-move. He called me again. This time his voice was different. The anger was gone, replaced by a thin, wheedling tone I'd never heard from him before. It was the sound of a man who had run out of moves. He offered me everything he had promised me before. He offered me a full partnership, my name on the door, a massive salary. He would even issue a press release correcting the record on the Helios design, crediting me as the co-architect. He was trying to buy me back, to absorb my victory into his company so he could still control it. He thought my loyalty could still be purchased. I let him finish. I let him lay all his cards on the table. And then I said, "No, Mason, thank you for the offer, but I'm no longer interested in a partnership. However, Phoenix Grid Solutions would be prepared to offer Sterling and Vance a one-time perpetual license for the Aura OS software." He asked, his voice barely a whisper, "What are the terms?" This was the moment, the culmination of 3 years of frustration, of a week of cold, calculated strategy. It wasn't about revenge. It was about a fair and accurate valuation of my work. I said, "The licensing fee will be a one-time payment of $75 million. I could hear him choke on the other end of the line. $75 million. It was a staggering number. It was also, not coincidentally, the exact amount of the performance bonus Sterling and Vance was set to receive for delivering the Helios Tower on time and on budget. It would wipe out their entire profit margin for the biggest project in the firm's history. But I wasn't done. I continued, in the same calm, even voice. Additionally, Sterling and Vance will issue a public statement. This statement will retract all previous claims of architectural credit for the Helios Tower's energy and sustainability systems. It will state for the public record that those systems were designed, developed, and engineered solely by me, Shay, and that the operating system, Aura OS, is the exclusive intellectual property of my company, Phoenix Grid Solutions. Finally, the license will be contingent on Sterling and Vance offering a full-time position to Lena, with a starting salary and benefits package that I will personally approve. There was a long, dead silence. I had taken his money, his credit, and his pride. I had demanded he publicly admit his lies and honor the one person in his company who had shown me loyalty. It was a complete and total capitulation. He had no choice. The alternative was bankruptcy and professional ruin. He whispered, "You'll get the papers," and the line went dead. The final confrontation was not what you might expect. There was no shouting, no dramatic showdown. It was something much quieter, much more devastating. He had to come to my office to sign the papers. My tiny, sterile, four-walled office. The man who sat on top of the city in his palatial suite had to take an elevator down to my level. The symbolism was not lost on either of us. He walked in, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His expensive suit seemed to hang off him. His face was gray, drained of all its usual arrogant color. His lawyer, a nervous man with a briefcase handcuffed to his wrist, stood behind him like a pallbearer. I didn't get up. I just motioned to the cheap chair opposite my desk. He sat. The silence in the room was heavier than concrete. My lawyer, the same friend who had helped with the patent, slid the stack of documents across the table. The licensing agreement, the public statement, the wire transfer confirmation. Mason stared at them, his hands trembling slightly. He wouldn't look at me. He was a king in exile, forced to treat with the rebel who had overthrown him. He signed each page without a word. His signature, once a bold, arrogant slash, was now a weak, spidery crawl. When he was done, he finally looked up at me. His eyes were hollow. He said, his voice a dry rasp, "Why? Was it worth it, Shay, to burn everything to the ground?" I leaned forward slightly. I thought about the 3 years of stolen work, the late nights, the condescension, the lies. I thought about the footnote in the press release. I thought about the framed photo and its insulting note, and I gave him the only answer that mattered. I said, "It wasn't about burning anything down, Mason. It was a correction. I was just a junior project lead, remember, assisting on the project." I turned his own words, the words he had used to erase me, into the final nail in his coffin. I saw something in his eyes break. The last flicker of his ego died out. He stood up, turned, and walked out of my office. He didn't look back. His lawyer scurried after him. I was left alone in the quiet of my new beginning, the signed papers sitting on my desk like a declaration of independence. A week later, the news broke. Phoenix Grid Solutions saves Helios Tower, one headline read. My picture was in the paper this time, not as a footnote, but as the founder and CEO. The articles detailed how my firm's proprietary software had solved the crisis, and included the full unedited text of Sterling and Vance's public retraction, and my sole credit. 2 days after that, an internal memo was leaked from Sterling and Vance. The board of directors had requested Mason Vance's immediate resignation. He was gone, erased, relegated to a footnote in the history of the company that once bore his name. My first official act as CEO of Phoenix Grid Solutions was to call Lena. I offered her the position of Chief Technology Officer. The salary I had demanded from Mason was obscene, but she was worth every penny. There was a moment of happy, tearful silence on the other end of the line, and then she said, "When do I start, boss? My new office is bigger now. We have a whole floor, with a view of the city, a view that includes the Helios Tower, shimmering in the afternoon sun, running perfectly on my code. It no longer feels like an amputated limb. It feels like a monument, not to his ego, but to my survival. The framed photo he gave me, it hangs on the wall in the executive bathroom, a souvenir, a reminder, a joke that only I find funny. So here I am, in my own building, at the head of my own table, surrounded by a team that respects me, working with clients who value me. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. It was about reclaiming the narrative. My name is Shay, and I am the architect of my own life. I didn't burn the old world down. I just built a new one that was better. And that's my story. It's a story about the quiet, calculated power of competence. It's for anyone who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or had their voice silenced. Your value is not determined by those who refuse to see it. Your worth is inherent. It's in the work you do, the ideas you have, the integrity you hold. Don't wait for them to give you a seat at the table. Go out and build your own damn table. Build your own building. And for God's sake, sign your work, not for them, but for you, so you never ever forget who made it. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt that fire of injustice, please hit that like button. It lets me know these stories matter. Leave a comment below and share your own experience. Our stories are our power. And if you want to hear more about turning the tables and reclaiming your worth, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. It's time we all stopped being footnotes and started writing our own headlines.